Hello, everyone, and welcome to my new series, The Art of Leading, Captivating Leadership Narratives, all part of the stuff that growth is made of. And I'm excited to introduce you today to Stacey Schultz. Stacey is the president of Educate and one of my founding members of the Vistage CEO Peer Advisory Group. And I'm so glad to be talking to you today, Stacey. I'm a huge fan, and you have such an important voice in our group. And I admire your thoughtful leadership approach. So I'm excited to share it with the masses. So what I'd love to do is start the conversation today. Just if you could share an overview of who is or what is Educate, what does your company do, and what do you do there, and who's your target client? So just a little background for the group.
Sure. Thanks, Margaret. And I'm excited to be here with you as well, and also a fan and appreciate all the support that you provide. So at Educate LLC, we partner with schools, with school districts, with school networks to really help them, to partner with them in creating a strategic vision around making space for all learners. And to us, all learners means, the adults in the space to, the student outcomes. And we do that by really considering what is learning, what is teaching and learning, and how is it creative? How is it adaptable? How is it meaningful? And how do we create that fun? Because, like I was in a PD the other day presenting and I was like, teaching is fun, right? So how do we make sure we have that element in our learning and experiences as a professional services company? I think, as I mentioned, who we serve and partner with, those are also our target audience. So we work with sort of both private and public school systems and schools. And we also work in a variety of different regions in the country.
Well, and learning is such, making it a positive experience is so important to not only young children, which is going to impact their view on learning for the rest of their lives, but to continue to engage people of all different ages. So it's really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. So would love for you to share a little bit about your career journey and how you got to your current leadership role.
Yeah, so I started working as a teacher, as a special education teacher. That was the beginning of my journey in New York City, and continued that journey through as an inclusion facilitator for the district, but working with regional school settings, and then going to a regional school setting as both director of special education and also as continuing to be a learning specialist support and co-teacher in the classroom. When I was pregnant with my second child, I was like, where do I want my journey to continue to go? And I thought about taking on a different career in education still, which led me to the Inclusive Classroom Project at Teachers College, where I got to work with many schools in really supporting them in their vision for equity and accessibility in education, which is, again, a lot of what we do at Educate as well. And I was also working with TNTP as a lead supervisor for, in the early 2000s, virtual coaching, which then seemed very
Unheard of, like what?
Yeah,
How do we do
how do we do this?
Yeah.
How do we get on? Where's the platform? Where's the face? And so it was really kind of interesting to be on the ground of that and supporting people and integrating that into their professional learning and growth opportunities. And then again, I think having children has been a real pivotal point, well, for any of us who have children out there, but for me, and like reflecting on, well, what is my identity as a professional and also a mother, and where do I want to be and how do I think about that? And so as I was pregnant with my third child, I said, I was traveling a lot for those roles, and I really wanted to shift a bit. And that's where I found myself here at Educate, at an organization who really wanted to shift what they were doing. Really, they were doing a lot of work in integrating technology into the classroom, and they wanted to go beyond that. And that was really exciting for me because I love leading change programs. I love working to make scaling up collectively, and that's really what they were wanting to do.
And, I think about you have so much besides work and your family going on in your life. You are like the ultimate learner. I mean, I know you've gone back to school again. I mean, it's really impressive. So you really do practice what you preach as well. Um, so when you think back in time, what advice would you give your younger self?
Margaret, I've been thinking a lot about that. There's a couple different elements that I think about. One of them is explore a little more before committing, which is really interesting. Commitment's really important to me. Once I say yes, I really go all in, and want to continue, as you mentioned, in whatever I'm in and committed to really grow and learn and be a partner alongside people as I'm doing that. But I think the other aspect for me is I kind of committed to this is a profession that I knew, right? What else was out there though? And now as I'm getting, a little later in my career, I'm like, oh, am I a little is this the industry now or is there other opportunity out there? I'm curious about it. But there's also this element for me of, well, when I was younger, I wish I had just paused and explored a little more as to what opportunities are out there. The other thing I would say is like just really, I think as becoming a leader and continuing to grow and really coaching, I think of my practice as a coach, as a transformational coach, really is about doing that inside out journey. And I think there's some elements of ourselves, especially as we're young, that we're a little more afraid to acknowledge and to touch.
Hmm.
And I wish there were, if I were to go back and give myself advice, I would say, those things don't necessarily define you and aren't the things that you're stuck with forever. So don't be afraid to unlock it sooner, unpack it sooner, talk about it sooner, right? Some things that I've experienced in my life have been really difficult. And it wasn't until later in my life that I felt very comfortable acknowledging that that's part of what defined who I am now and felt sort of embarrassed and or ashamed of what those experiences were. And so now embracing them, I think I would have said that. Younger self, embrace those because they are part of you, but they don't define you.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Such great advice on both of those points. Your first point about sometimes you fall into something, and you're right. I mean, sometimes I feel like, boy, I didn't explore. I kind of went down this path, but it's never too late. Also, I mean, people have wonderful skills, and sometimes you think it's just defined by a specific job, and it's really not. So, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Very thoughtful. So, changing topics just a little bit. When you think back to some of your early leadership roles, what were some of the challenges that you faced?
Well, my early professional leadership roles or early leadership roles, period.
Oh, that's a great question. However you want to answer that.
I think I would go back to being a leader in college, being a student, government leader. And I remember there were moments, and I was in college when, the Twin Towers were attacked. And so I remember before that moment, and I'm really glad I had these experiences. I had a great mentor, a really great friend, and there were times where I thought I had to do it all by myself, right? And so I would kind of go in there and I would tell, okay, here's what we need to do, here's how it needs to get done, and how are we, who's doing what and what's your responsibility, and did you do it, did you not? It's just very directive. It wasn't as collaborative. And because I was holding on to some assumptions I had about the other leaders who were coming in, that they weren't taking it as seriously, that they didn't necessarily want to do it. They just, were there. And I had, moments where I was lucky that I had critical friends that were like, is this who you want to be? Because this is how you're showing up. And it was a really helpful moment. And I bring up around the Twin Towers, I was in my senior year because that was a pause moment for all of us, right? And because I had grown in my leadership by then, it really created a space where we all could lean into and have meaningful conversations about what happened, about how do we want to respond together, what feels meaningful and important at this time in this moment. And I think, that going through those moments of crisis, you can't do it alone, right? And if I hadn't learned before that was true, then I think there would have been it could have been a really awful, or it was an awful moment, but it could have been an awful response versus us kind of collectively responding as a community.
So, and thanks for sharing that, because I look at you as such a collaborative leader right now. And the other thing that comes to mind as you're talking about this is giving yourself permission to be vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And once you do that, it's easier to be collaborative, right?
Yeah.
So I'm glad you went back to college rather than in your work thing. So that was a great example. Thank you for that. As we look at the last few years, it's been really challenging, right? I always say, you have COVID, you have a lot of uncertainty in terms of economic times, you've got all this social and political things that have been going on, and there's really no playbook for leaders anymore. I know we talk about a lot of these type of things in our Vistage group each month. What are some of the lessons you've learned or aha moments that you've had over the past few years?
I think I would draw on, some of those lessons I learned as an younger leader, right? In that it does take a collective response. It does take making space for all of our humanity that shows up, right? Because I think there's this interesting, intersection of who we are as individuals and who we are as professionals. And there are like boundaries to that as well, but there are certainly intersections of that. And how we as workplaces define that has to be a collective effort, right? And has to be aligned to who the people are there and now, right? And continually has to evolve because of that. And I think, sometimes it's easy to get stuck in conversations of like, well, that's not what we were doing like 2 or 3 years ago. And it's like, no. And I think that's going to be a very common sentiment of no, the organizations that if they survive, right, will continually be saying, oh, that's not what we were doing a few years ago, because the demands of our environment are quickly shifting, but also our demands of our workforce are as well. Absolutely. And how are we responding to that and being mindful of that? And how do we create those spaces that allow for voices to be heard and even understood? Like, right, this is the kinds of conversations we have at this organization. And if that's uncomfortable for you, this might not be the space. There's I think the woman's name is Priya Parker, and she talks about inclusivity, right? And she talks a lot about, well, who are you inviting? And there's a lot about who are you inviting is about being really clear about, well, what is this space that we are right now? And people knowing about themselves, like, is that a space I want to be in, a space that's going to have critical conversations, this where there's a lot of different perspectives at the table, and how are we hearing and acting on those perspectives is going to be, I think, really important. And the more ideas, the better we become, right? The better we can evolve them, right? That is always been the case, right? That old saying, right? Two heads are better than one. Yeah, that's true, right? The more, and then we start to riff off each other and we evolve it, the idea, and we grow it together. And that doesn't happen in a vacuum with one person.
Yeah. So well said. And it's also so interesting, to your point, that there's more, not merging, I'm not sure overlap is the right word either, but personal lives are morphing a little
Integrate it.
bit, right, into work, right? Whether it's having Zoom, sometimes you and I are talking and my cat starts, it's lunchtime, right? Or, you know, childcare needs, it brought our entire selves, if you will, to the table. And that's not going back to how it was before. And that's not bad necessarily, but it's something to think about, because it does make a difference in terms of where you're working and the conversations you have and what's acceptable and what's not. So
absolutely.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for that. So what would you say your biggest challenge and opportunity is right now?
As an organization?
However you want to answer that.
Yeah, I think, and it might be also as a leader, right? And it's really interesting. It might have been last fall, time becomes a blur a little. I was at a conference where we were supporting various different schools at this district, and one of the teachers and leader came running up to talk to me about how impactful the work has been. And she said, the one thing I have to say about leaders and organizations that are doing really great work is that sometimes they just keep their head down because they're doing the work and they forget to share it. They forget to announce it. They forget to talk about it. They forget to, be out there, spreading the word, so to speak, being their own ambassador. And I would say that is a challenge I have as a leader, of like self-promotion, so to speak, or even promotion, period. And I'm definitely in that head down, do the work, do it really well, and it speaks for itself. But that's not the world we live in, right? It's a really noisy world, so to speak. There's constant input of from social media about what this people are doing, that people, and if you're not on there, and if you're not kind of out there sharing your story very visibly, you can get lost. And so I think that's one of our biggest challenges, to really doing that better, and doing that more. And again, I definitely, as I mentioned, is a challenge for myself too.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a challenge for a lot of us. As you look at yourself as a leader, how do you measure success?
It's interesting, Margaret. I don't have one way of measuring my success. I think, each year I have a involved process that I touch on multiple times through the year, but I really look at, well, how have I been showing up? How do I want to show up? How can that evolve? And how will I know that has evolved? And so there's not one way, but I would say, as I identify the areas that I want to grow in as a leader, I get very specific about how I want to see that show up. And then I'll ask people, just how can, three questions I almost always ask when I'm providing a performance conversation is ask for my own performance mini conversation from everyone is, what do you see me doing really well? What might be some of my blind spots? And where would you like to see me improving, as, a leader, a supporter, and that's really helpful in letting me know, are the things I'm even focusing on as a leader happening for them. I mean, another way, and you know this very well, that I measure my success is, of course, by the performance of the organization. So how are we performing as an organization? And not just revenue wise, but as far as like the moves we're making, the things we're integrating, are we innovating? Are we shifting? Do we have what we need to scale and grow? And, so a lot of the talent so there's a lot of sort of elements that speak to that and like organizational factors.
I know you, and I know you keep yourself accountable. I would imagine, though, there's a lot of people out there who, um, it reminds me, like January 1, we all start with goals, both work and personally. Um, what's your secret sauce in terms of keeping yourself accountable? Because again, it's easier to do it at work in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
especially if there's something there's a dashboard, it's quantifiable and things like that. How do you keep yourself accountable in terms of some of your own personal goals or as a leader that you have each year?
Um, I've explored this before and tried to reflect really specifically on that. I think I've done it for so long. It was somewhat ingrained in me because there was something about the commitment of showing up. Like if I say I'm going to do something, I really want to do it. And that doesn't mean I don't pivot or at times I've 100% let go of things, but that's a real, conversation with myself. Um, I think so two things I would say is being very intentional. Like, what am I really committing to and why? And like I mentioned before, how does that make sense and align to kind of what I've been building towards and what I want to build towards versus just, oh, this is a new habit that I want to ingrain. That for me, I'm not, that's not how I approach it. I approach it more from this evolution and learning stance and curiosity. Quite frankly, from a curious stance of, well, what is it? How am I trying to show up and how am I trying to lead? And um, what would best serve the community I'm serving? And does it serve the community I'm serving? Because that's a whole other like layer, or my family, right? Is what I'm doing serving our family, and how might that need to evolve, and what might that need to look like? And then just sharing those commitments, right? Maybe not. I don't necessarily always share the goals specifically. There's some interesting science out there, like when we say those goals aloud, sometimes it's like we already feel like we're working on them. But I like to, at least say what I'm committing intentionally to out loud to others. And also, and it's funny, right? Because I haven't named any specific here. So I'm already sharing, like I don't necessarily do that, but I do get I will share generally like what my intentions are. And then I think the other part of it is somewhat being disciplined about it. And knowing like sometimes these things are uncomfortable and kind of being aware of that in my body and okay, well, why is that coming up? What might need to shift and being responsive to that. And that's also part of how I think it's not just about holding yourself accountable, but how do you sustain the effort towards
Making
reaching
it
your goal?
happen in a way, yeah. As
Mhm.
I said, you're one of the most disciplined. Again, you're a runner, you're a biker, you do so many different things in your life. I don't know how you juggle it all, and you do them really well. So I know that you keep yourself accountable, but I just thought the listeners would,
Yeah.
learn from, kind of your thought process on that as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Hmm.
So,
Absolutely.
as I have said a few times, you are, I know learning is really important to you and growing personally, professionally. You talked about how do you continue to improve yourself and make an impact.
Hmm.
So, I know you're a big reader. I know you've shared some really great books with the group. What are you reading now? And what's your favorite leadership book and why?
Mm. Okay. Well, what I'm reading now, so I'm currently enrolled in an executive coaching certificate program. Sorry, it has a really long name at Georgetown, and Institute for Transformational Leadership. And so a lot of what I'm reading is very connected to that program. And I'm looking at my side because it's where I keep my books. So it's Your Body and Your Brain is one. Coactive coaching is another. Navigating polarities. Your Unique Cultural Lens, A Guide to Cultural Competency. I'm also reading The End Game.
Oh,
That's about scaling. Yeah, yeah, you probably know that
yeah.
well. And the other book that I have here is called Skander and the Phantom Rider. So my son, one of my sons and I, um, he loves to read fantasy series, and he reads them first and then passes them to me. So we try to keep up with each other and have that. And our kids and us, we all have series we're consistently reading together as like at night together. But then this is an additional reading book, and so I love having that on my having one of those books too. It's also fun when you're like, oh, I need a little relief from
Yeah.
some of this
A
very
little bit
heady.
of trash, but not is it good? I think of I for so long refused to read the Harry Potter books. I was like, oh, that's really not my thing. And then I did the audio as I walked. Oh my God, I was so disappointed when they were all over. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
these were so good. So
Fun and engaging. Yeah.
yeah,
Fun to have those. And also a reason why I love like murder mystery books, right? They're fun.
I like murder mysteries.
Fun is a weird way to say it's a
Yeah,
weird thing to say about murder mysteries, but they're engaging, right?
yeah.
And they keep you the suspense, right? Keeps you engaged.
And when you think
Um,
from a leadership perspective, what would you say is
mhm.
one of your favorite books that you read?
Hmm. I have a really hard time naming like one book. I think, and why is because I think you can find elements that can inform your leadership from so many spaces. And sometimes I think it's in the least expected place. And for example, I just shared I read murder mystery novels, and I like Louise Penny, and she has this whole series, the Gamache Detective series, right? There's about 18 books out now. And what's so amazing about her writing is how she really talks about humanity, right? It's like this element of in this murder, right? They're still like the person who committed it is still a human, and what element of them, what happened to them, right? Too, and just the way she explores humanity. There are times and elements of that I wind up sharing with my team, right, to reflect on because we are so human centric and focused and and so really I feel like our and even for my own kids, like I love my daughter. She'll ask a question and I'll be like, I don't know, Allie, I just don't know, like it's 9 o'clock at night. We're like
Yes.
reading and going to bed. Why? And then she'll be like, but if you had to say something, what would you say? Or if
It's
you,
a good question.
yeah, and she has another one too. But what do you think? And I was like, wow, that is a wonderful, right, moment of a leadership lesson of like, you don't have to have the answer, right? Like, and it's such an important lesson for everyone to learn. You don't have to have the answer.
Yeah.
The idea, there's not necessarily a right answer. So what are you thinking about this question as I pose it to you, or this challenge or whatever it might be? So it's really hard for me to like name just one. But I think, there have been many that have really informed me as a leader. And maybe I'll share some with you so you can put it in the description.
Yeah, no, that's great. So thank you for that. So in closing, would love, if you were to be able to distill the critical success factors or secret sauce in from your perspective, being an effective leader today, what might that look like?
Yeah. Uh, I would definitely say personally, I lead with a lot of curiosity. I think, curiosity can be a curse too, right? It can get you to go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, of just being curious. So how do you match that curiosity with reflection and action? I think are important elements. I think being collaborative and looking for solutions cross industry, cross discipline, so to speak, are going to be very important. So how are you connecting outside of your own sort of bubble, so to speak? I think that, that's like one thing, Vistage tries to do, right? Bringing people in from all different industries to have these conversations because the threads are common, right? But the way that we might approach them could be different and we could learn from each other in that way. I, I think being adaptable and that continuous learner, I think is going to be really important. And not just because I think that's what I do, but also because we're shifting so quickly as a society, and we're gonna need to be able to do that. And with being able to also let go of right and wrong, right? That either or thinking. So having that integrative thinking mindset of like solutions are in more place than just like a one way of doing it.
Yeah, I love that. And I love, lead with a lot of curiosity and match it with reflection and action. I think that's a great way to end this podcast. So thank you for sharing your
You're
thoughts and
welcome.
insights around the art of leading. And thank you all for listening. This is the stuff that growth is made of. Thank you. Appreciate it.